Thanks very much. So okay, yeah, that should work. Yeah, good morning, everybody, and thank you, first of all, Tom, Adriana in particular, for the invitation, Deanne, and probably other folks behind the scenes as well for making all this possible. So I'm going to talk today about plots, 15 minutes, in summary of kind of what they've told us, why they matter, and tropical forests is actually the theme as well, of course. And we'll start with a bit of politics rather than science, because I thought it's important to put a wider perspective for you folks here. These are all statements which came out in Glasgow, right, November last year. And actually, you may think, you know, as scientists and trainee scientists, which most of us are, these are perhaps obvious statements, but in the political world, this is kind of new. So forests absorb 1/3 of the global CO2 released from fossil fuels every year. That's impressive. The president of Indonesia talked about protecting these critical carbon sinks. That's impressive. We've hardly heard that before. And our own prime minister, now he has an unusual relationship with the truth, let's acknowledge that. But he does say, and we would take him at his word in this case. Yep. Bit further away. Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. Okay. He says that these forests absorb the carbon we pump into the atmosphere. And that's, okay, that's kind of big claims for us. Yeah. But given everything we hear about climate change killing trees and all the problems that it implies, actually this statement about these carbon sinks with such certainty, political certainty, is perhaps surprising. And it's worth asking, is this really what we expect to see or not? And in fact, I think there are basically two big forces pulling in opposite directions. And which one will win, if you like, is still not clear. And it's arguably not clear which one is winning now. We'll come on to that. So on the first side, of course, climate change per se. So let's call it global heating, right? So climate getting hotter, drier in some places. The droughts are getting hotter and drier, which is particularly very critical. And so trees like to die faster and grow more slowly and lose biomass. Just quickly, just have a look at that image. It's surprising. Just have a look at the tropics. We hear about the high latitudes warming very fast, but actually also the terrestrial tropics are warming faster than the global average. And I'm looking at Brazilians in the audience. Your country is warming faster than any other country in the tropics over the last 100 years. And 2 degrees is a lot, 100 years, right? But on the other hand, of course, CO2 has increased by 50% in the same time. Of course, that CO2 is the main driver of the temperature increase, but it is fertilization for plants because it's the key ingredient in photosynthesis, along with light and water. Okay, so these forces really acting in opposite direction. It's not clear from first principles which should win, which is why we have to look. Okay, the only way to know is to look. But how do we know then, or how can Boris and his mates be so sure that these forests, and including tropical forests and including mature tropical forests, are providing carbon sinks? You may well think, and they may well think, and I suspect they probably do, that this is how we know. Spending millions, hundreds of millions, billions, putting really advanced and amazing sensors in space and watching the Earth top down. And there's fantastic things going on, and these satellites do amazing things, including, for example, and this is really important, tracking deforestation, land use change from space. They do that really, really well. But what we're interested in is what's happening within forests. And though there's great technologies being developed and being implemented now, they're not so good about looking within the forest, and particularly about looking about change within the forest, which is actually the topic that interests me and is actually really, really important. It turns out, and I do have, I'm not sure I have time because we're a bit over, but I brought with you the sensor that we use, okay? Now I know some people will know about this. This is really cool. If you haven't seen one of these before, it's actually a bit more sophisticated than you think. Promise you. On one side, there is a tape measure, which is an ordinary, yeah, that's, well, you probably won't be able to see that, but anyway, ordinary tape measure. The other side is the same thing, but multiplied by pi. That's advanced science. So basically what that does, you wrap it around the tree and it gives you the diameter of the tree straight off. Now that's kind of important, okay? This is the sensor that's been employed. Busy employed, you know, in this rather trivial way that I've described it, but actually, and I hope folks at the back can see this, but perhaps you can't, but I will describe this picture. This is in Colombia. It's a cyber tree, 50 meters tall, 30 meters canopy radius, no, canopy diameter, sorry, canopy diameter. They're climbing 10 meters up to measure it. Why? Because it's such a huge tree, it has huge buttresses to sustain it. If you measure around the buttresses, you get a rubbish number, it has nothing to do with biomass. If you get to the cylindrical point, you can get biomass. But of course, this is a 2 meter diameter tree, by the way, way up there. It took three colleagues to climb to that height with a ladder and then climbing up lianas and stranglers to get higher. And then they have to measure that point and they have to come back to that every time we go to the same place. Because if you don't go back to the same place, you don't get diameter growth and therefore you don't get biomass growth. This is really tough work. And the main point I want to make today is that these people are not just, they don't just matter, they are the ones which are telling us and telling the politicians the things that they told us in Glasgow, right? It's these people, that's where it comes from. It's incredible work and it's undervalued. But actually, as well as that climbing and sort of technical expertise, you also need botanists, and that's just another world of incredible complexity. We don't have time to talk about today about how tough that is. But this one place, this one plot in Alpawaya we collected, 1 hectare, 100 meters times 100 meters, has 300 tree species. Right, you can go away and research how many tree species there are in the UK, but I assure you it's many fewer than is in 1 hectare of the Amazon forest. And it turns out that not only that, but the local flora, so the local species that could be there are thousands of trees which could be in that plot, and you don't know until you measure them, collect them, identify them. And that is really tough work. And it's important for all sorts of reasons to do that, but particularly in the context of carbon, for knowing the wood density, you need to use your ID, right? Because effectively, although it's a bit more complicated than that, but biomass is volume times density. Yeah. So the botanists really matter. They're also unsung heroes. And then you've got to do this sort of work again and again with teams, these sort of different cultures, getting work together, visiting the same site. So I don't know, Alta Floresta here, there's teams have been every few years, and every time they've got to go back and measure the same thing again. And if you do that with enough people over time and space, then amazing things come in terms of results. These are just some of the authors, I couldn't fit them on, who contributed to the latest paper from Forest Plots. And really, it's likely that every one of those has done something like I just showed you, or something else equally amazing. You put those numbers together from all that work in South America, but also in Africa and to a lesser extent in Borneo. And essentially you're measuring the gain, the net gain in biomass over time on these quite small plots, and then scaling up quite heroically by the area of mature forest in the region. These are the numbers you come to. So that's about 500 million tons of carbon going into the mature forests of the Amazon each year. Okay, the measurement stopped in 2011, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. In Africa, it's gone a bit further forward. Add these numbers together, it's about 1 billion tons of carbon. Okay, that's a lot. I think I have a slide giving you the context. Yes, okay. So that 1 billion ton carbon sink in mature tropical forests each year is close to half Earth's terrestrial sink. The fraction is probably falling now, and I'll explain to you why in a moment. And when you see a fantastic map like this, again, you would think, and I thought this was a satellite-derived map, but when you look really, really carefully at what they've done, they've taken essentially our network's results for the tropics and painted all that green across the Amazon and Africa is based on the field work. It's based on measuring trees, like, as you've seen here. There's other stuff, there's the net change driven by deforestation, of course, really important, that's satellites. And I'm not sure how they got the boreal and temperate, where we'll have to look more closely, but I guess the plots were important there too. Yeah, okay, so it's not just the net sink that's interesting and important, but also we're seeing changes in growth, okay? So this is over time, both in Africa and Amazonia. Now this is a 25, 30-year trend. The growth of the system has increased, right? The woody growth has increased. Okay, that's pretty impressive. But the net sink now we're looking at here, and those of you who heard Jerome's excellent talk yesterday would have seen this already, the net sink in the Amazon is declining. And that's actually largely because mortality has been increasing as well as growth. Yeah, mortality increase has been faster, but it's been punctuated in these episodes of drought, 2005 and 10, and actually 2015 to 16. We've got analysis also kind of in review now. And you can see the power of the plots, theme of the talk. You can pick out not just the long-term trend in the processes and the net sink, but also interannual fluctuations if you have enough plots measured in enough places over time. And then you can combine that with species as well, and you can ask, for example, does biodiversity provide drought resistance of forests? Does it help forests to recover? And those are the kind of really exciting questions that you can answer with these, and with the help of all these people. The big question in terms of the sink is, will it continue? If so, why or why not? And perhaps just as importantly, for country levels, maybe some of the countries that are currently sinks may no longer be sinks, and if so, we need to know. And those great things we can do with experiments, and I'm a big supporter of experiments and models and remote sensing, none of those will tell you exactly what's happening on the ground inside the forest now. So we need the observations as well. They're all part of the bigger package. Now, here's the sad news for me, is that in the Amazon, our long-term plots are actually being lost. So there's lots of people installing new plots all the time, which is fantastic. But recensusing the existing ones, that's really, really hard to do. So this map I'll explain to you so you can see it about. I'm sorry. So 2020s are secured already in green. So that means that the censuses have either been done recently or we know that there's funding. But where it's in yellow, there hasn't been a census for years, and there is no funding currently in place. And you can see that for the Amazon in particular, there's a lot of yellow, okay? And that's, shocking, surprising. Of around about 1,000 long-term plots in South American forests, more than half are not currently funded. And in the Amazon, the situation is actually worse. So my other message is, people are doing fantastic work, but don't count on it continuing. It just doesn't happen for no reason at all. It happens because people want to do it. And to be honest, people are paid to do it and also trained to do it. And also that they see some benefit for themselves. It's really important. And currently we're at risk of losing this. And here's the funding pitch. I won't mention the number, but I'll tell you the fraction. The cost to secure those for the next 5 years, that's the whole Amazon monitoring system on the ground, is 1% of the budget of one satellite that's being launched into space, hopefully next year, to estimate biomass from space for tropical forests. So it's bizarre. And what a strange world we live in. We're putting billions to put sensors into space, which we should be doing, but we're not investing the few millions in the communities who are measuring the forest and the ground. It's absolutely crazy, okay? So money is a big part of the problem we face, but it's actually more than that. We need to recognize much more overtly, get this message right through to the politicians too. Who's doing the work that underpins our knowledge and these statements? And it's just lots and lots of people doing really, really detailed work on the ground. In fact, over 2,500 at the moment. I want to just tell you, I'm probably running over, tell you very briefly, okay, about, just to kind of put some faces on this. So this is two colleagues of mine, Pedro, Maquirino, Rafael, Herrera in Venezuela. And this photo, I like the photo for all sorts of reasons. It was taken in 2004, okay? That plot was then 30 years old. So this is the first long-term monitoring site we know of, which is just about still going in Amazonia, and in a really remote place, yeah? And these guys set it up. They were part of a bigger team. They set it up in 1974. And happily, they're both still with us, okay? But this plot is now nearly 50 years old, which is fantastic. They've done a wonderful job. Pedro's son wrote to me recently and said, "Where are you? What's going on? Why isn't rainfall coming back? Or why aren't our Venezuelan colleagues coming back?" There's a long story, of course, to that. But ultimately, there isn't funding. And the cost to get to this area, because it's quite remote, is about, and to measure the plot, is about $20,000. But we haven't got it. We haven't got a grant to do that. At the moment, the last time that was census, that site was 10 years ago. So we're in danger of losing it. Okay, this is a key sentinel site. $20,000 is all it takes to sustain it. and it's frankly not there. I can explain maybe in questions why it's so hard to raise the money, but it's ridiculous. So just to wrap up then, Tom, I'm going to wrap up. What do we need to do? We need to, and we're good at that because we're foresters and ecologists. We don't think short term, right? You know, we know that trees live decades, centuries. They live actually longer than us usually. Now when you think about a project cycle, that's kind of a bit of a challenge, isn't it? But I think all of us, we need to learn how to think kind of slowly and act for the long term. Really kind of think about building things up, not going for the quick flash, easy thing. Monitoring is about the long term. Okay, that's kind of obvious. I was struggling to say how I would phrase this, but I would say get over our obsession with technology, with innovation, with novelty, doing things the new way all the time. I don't think that's quite right. I think we need to focus at least as much on integration of methods and of people and networks and styles and communities as we do on innovation. And that's a real big beef I have with the funding agencies. The narrative we're getting at the moment, it's all about innovation. But innovation is technology. Innovation is not science. Okay, so we're interested in the long term. We're interested in doing things well. And that means integrating the new stuff into the long-term observation networks, doing it well. And then finally, then just let's get real. Who's actually doing the work? Let's recognize who's really doing the work, taking the risks, measuring all these species. And that poses challenges for all of us in this room, myself included. But and those challenges, you know, are a topic for another talk. But let's think about those. Ultimately, we need to put people first. That's the only way we're going to really address this problem of monitoring and understanding forests in the long term. It's primarily a human social problem, at least as much as a technological challenge. Yeah. Okay. That's all. I want to say thank you to all the institutional partners, and I've highlighted University of Birmingham because it's an important and an increasingly important part of everything we're doing. Thank you very much.